Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking our analysis into Southern Africa. We're focusing specifically on a country often seen as a real African success story, Botswana. And as the gambling databases research team, our whole focus is delivering these really in-depth analyses of the global iGaming landscape. We dig into regulations, tax, player experience, what it's like for operators, emerging trends. Basically, our goal is always to give you a clear, data-driven picture of what makes a market tick. And today, well, our mission is to really analyze the critical risk factors in Botswana. It's a market our latest report rates as below average, proceed with extreme caution. And the fascinating thing, the reason we have to issue that kind of warning is because Botswana, well, on paper, it just looks like a fantastic prospect for digital growth. Stable upper middle income driven by diamonds, yes, but with a digital footprint that, frankly, many larger African economies would envy.
It really does create this huge paradox. You look at those infrastructure numbers, the internet penetration, the mobile coverage, and you'd assume, okay, the government must be all in on digital business. But then you look at the actual legal framework. And yes, the land-based sector is fully regulated. They've got the Gambling Act of 2012. The Botswana Gambling Authority is active, busy even. But the online market, it exists in what people call a regulatory gray area.
Okay, but gray area can mean different things, right? Sometimes it's just lax enforcement.
Exactly. But this isn't that. Our analysis shows it's more of a zero legal framework problem. The law is just silent, completely silent on digital operations. And that silence, you see, it hides these massive operational risks that honestly just swallow up any potential profit you think you see. So our goal for you today is to cut through those shiny statistics and really understand why the risk here is so disproportionate to any potential reward.
Okay, got it. So let's start by, setting the stage properly with the lore. Because the country's foundation is genuinely impressive, and you need to understand that appeal before we get into the pitfalls. I mean, if you're a digital business looking at Africa, Botswana's metrics really jump out. We're talking internet penetration. What is it, 81.4%? That's about 2.07 million users.
Which is huge.
Right.
Puts them right near the top on the continent.
Right. And crucially, they have solid 4G coverage, reaching, I think, 91% of the population. And our data confirms this is very much a mobile-first market, like 70 to 80% of all traffic is on mobile.
Yeah, absolutely. And that digital readiness, it pairs really nicely with the demographics. You've got a young population. The median age is just 23.4 years old.
Wow, that's young.
It is. So you've got this natural base for digital adoption. And maybe more practically for operators, there's a high urbanization rate, 75.6%.
Nice.
That simplifies market targeting quite a bit. You can focus resources on Gaborone, other key hubs. It's not like some vast, super decentralized markets you find elsewhere.
Okay, and then you layer on the financial side. GDP per capita is healthy. 8,159 USD DSD, right? That puts it firmly in that upper middle income bracket. But the really big player perk, the one that always gets attention, is the tax situation. There's no taxation on gambling winnings for individual players.
Zero tax. You win, you keep it all.
Mm-hmm.
Which is obviously incredibly player-friendly.
Attractive.
And it definitely influences player behavior. Sports betting is, hands down, the most popular activity, driven by, massive football fandom, like in many places. But here's the critical link. Back to that infrastructure point, mobile money. Things like Orange Money, Mascom Izaka, BTC Smega, they are absolutely vital.
Why vital? Because not everyone has a bank account.
Precisely. Only about 50 to 60% of adults are formally banked. So mobile money bridges that gap.
Yeah.
It makes digital transactions feasible for the mass market, not just the banked population.
That makes sense. And you also mentioned the high literacy rate, 88.5%. I guess that helps too.
It definitely doesn't hurt. It means players can, generally understand game rules, terms and conditions, that sort of complex language operators use.
So if you just stop there, look at stability, the youth, the digital access, mobile money, zero player tax, you'd think, okay, this market looks pretty ripe for investment. But here's the thing that puzzles me. The government seems pro-business. They're clearly pro-regulation, given how fast they're rolling out the land-based licenses. So why is the online side just stuck? What's the Botswana Gambling Authority waiting for?
That really is the core question, isn't it? And I think it boils down to regulatory priority, not necessarily capability. Let's go back to that legal status. Online gambling is simply unregulated. The 2012 Gambling Act, silent on the matter. And like you said, they're rapidly expanding the regulated physical side. They just issued 10 new national bookmaker licenses in 2025. That shows they want regulated growth. But the online space seems to be a different beast for them right now. That legislative silence, it means there's literally zero legal framework. So if you, as an operator, decide to run a site targeting Botswana citizens anyway, Well, you have zero legal protection, no recourse within the country if something goes wrong. And this isn't just some theoretical risk. It hits your bottom line immediately.
And that lack of licensing, that's why our operator E's score in the report is so low.
Absolutely. It's a pretty dismal 3.8 out of 10. And the fundamental reason, the absolute blocker, is that as of right now, 2025, there is no licensing pathway for online operators, period. We couldn't even give them a single point on that specific criterion in our scoring.
Yeah.
0 out of 2.5 points for licensing availability.
Ouch.
Yeah. And the immediate painful consequence of being unlicensed, it's the friction in payments. Local banks, quite rightly, are unable to explicitly support an unlicensed sector. So operators are forced to rely entirely on expensive, often clunky international payment processors. And those fees you're looking at 2.5% to 3.5% for card transactions, they're crippling.
And
Critically, it excludes that huge chunk of the population, the 40 to 50%, who rely primarily on mobile money. You're essentially cutting off maybe half your potential market right from the start because the payment rails just aren't there for the unlicensed world.
it does sound like the government is signaling that regulation will come eventually, though. Our report mentions projected tax rates, right, for if and when licensing is introduced.
They are definitely signaling intent. The projected GGR tax rates, that's gross gaming revenue, look quite competitive on paper, about 6.5% for sports betting, 10% for casino.
How does that compare regionally?
Well, if you put that in context, compare it to somewhere like Kenya, which has seen effective tax rates climb well into the 20s recently,
Hmm.
or even parts of South Africa, depending on provincial taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 6.5% and 10% looks pretty favorable.
Okay.
So the future regulatory environment, if it materializes like that, looks potentially good. But the key word there is hypothetical. It's all hypothetical right now, and operating on hypotheticals is, well, it's dangerous.
Okay, let's quickly touch on the player side again. Our player access score is moderate, 5.5 out of 10. You mentioned players aren't penalized for using offshore sites, which sounds good for them.
It is good for them, in one sense. Players face absolutely zero legal penalties, no prosecution for using offshore sites. They're safe from the law. But,
Mhm.
and it's a big but, the critical downside for the player is that they also have zero legal recourse if an offshore operator suddenly decides to, close up shop, refuse to pay out a big win, or
Yeah.
just vanish.
Ah.
So you can play freely, yes, but you have absolutely no consumer protection framework backing you up if things go sour.
Okay, right. So let's tie this all together. You've got the operational risk, no license, expensive banking, limited payment options. Let's connect that to the core financial reality, because this is where, as you said, we really shift from a market that looks interesting to one that's defined by, well, almost impossible economics.
That's exactly right. The underlying financials are what truly push Botswana into that trap category for most potential investors. And it really starts with the size of the prize itself. The total estimated annual online gambling market size, and we're talking total GGR here. Remember, wagers minus winnings. It's tiny. Our estimate puts it at only around $20 million to $40 million US dollars across all operators currently active.
20 to 40 million. That figure is genuinely shocking, especially when you think over 2 million internet users, relatively high GDP for the region. Why is the GGR ceiling so low?
It seems low, doesn't it? There are a few key things going on there. Firstly, even with a decent GDP per capita, actual discretionary income, the money people have for entertainment like gambling, is still much lower than in, say, Western Europe or North America. Secondly, the market, even though unregulated, is already quite fragmented. It's dominated by large, established offshore brands that have been serving Botswana players for years. They have brand recognition. And thirdly, perhaps that lack of regulatory confidence means players might just be betting smaller amounts than they would in a fully regulated, protected market.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Now, let's compare that small ceiling to the costs you simply can't avoid. Our analysis shows that just the initial setup, things like platform costs, essential legal advice, even for the gray market, maybe setting up some kind of minimal local presence for payments that's going to run you somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million USD.
$500,000 to $1 million just to get started.
And then you've got your monthly operating costs, staff, maybe a small office, specialized tech, compliance monitoring. It's another $50,000 to $150,000 USD every single month.
I get the compliance stuff, legal fees. But for a lean startup trying to be nimble, couldn't they avoid a lot of that 500,000 initial setup by running totally remotely?
It's incredibly difficult.
Right.
And it comes back to that payment friction we talked about. If you want any hope of integrating local mobile money solutions, which remember is essential to reach maybe half the population,
Mm-hmm.
you almost certainly need some kind of local presence or partnership. And that involves substantial fees, local compliance hoops to jump through, even in this gray environment. You probably can't expect to operate effectively in Botswana using only Western payment methods and expect to gain real traction.
Okay. So let's use the high end of those monthly costs you mentioned, say 150K. What kind of revenue do you need just to cover your expenses?
Right. So if we take those higher operational costs, and we also factor in the projected tax rates for the future, just to be conservative, our break-even analysis suggests you'd need roughly $185,000 in monthly gross gaming revenue just to break even
$185,000 GGR per month.
per month. Now think about that total estimated market size, $20 to $40 million annually. To hit 185K a month, you'd need to somehow capture a massive 5% to maybe even 11% market share of the entire estimated market.
A new entrant
Good.
against established offshore giants.
Exactly. It's an incredibly tough, arguably unsustainable target for almost any new player coming in cold.
Right.
And this gets even harder when you look at the ARPU, that's the average revenue per user. In Botswana, our estimate puts ARPU at only somewhere between 50 and 150 US dollars annually.
Wow. Okay. A maximum of $150 per user per year. That is a real wake-up call, especially if you're used to, say, European markets.
It absolutely is. I mean, for context, a European operator might be targeting an ARPU closer to the $300, maybe $500, even more sometimes. So when you have such a low annual return per player, and you factor in customer acquisition costs, which start relatively high even here, maybe 30 to 80 US dollars just to get a player signed up, the lifetime value calculation looks grim. That LTV barely justifies the cost of acquiring the customer in the first place, let alone covering those huge fixed operational costs we talked about. The basic math, for most operators, it just doesn't work without absolutely massive, sustained capital investment.
Right. And this crushing financial pressure, it leads directly into the final and maybe the most critical risk warning in our report. It's about future market access, isn't it? The idea that even if you do invest now, it could all become worthless later.
Precisely. We issue what we call a critical risk warning about certain future ISP blocking. Because when online regulation does eventually happen, our best guess is maybe 2 to 3 years, but honestly, it could be longer. Botswana is overwhelmingly likely to follow the pattern we've seen elsewhere in Africa, which is enforcing strict blocking of any unlicensed offshore operators. They'll do it via the internet service providers, blocking access to websites. And, just as importantly, they'll clamp down hard on payment channels, blocking transactions to and from unlicensed sites via mobile money and bank transfers. So what does that mean for you? It means any investment you make right now to try and capture a slice of this temporary gray market. Well, it's going to abruptly disappear the moment the license market opens up. All that capital you spent acquiring those low ARPU players in this unprotected environment, poof, rendered useless overnight because you'll be locked out entirely. You won't have a license.
So the final financial verdict, for the vast majority of companies thinking about Botswana iGaming, it sounds brutal.
It really is.
Mm.
The economics are, for most, prohibitive.
Mm.
You realistically need $3 million to $5 million US dollars in initial capital, minimum. And crucially, you must be willing and able to sustain significant losses for probably 5 to 7 years while you wait for a licensing framework that, let's be honest, may or may not materialize in a way that's favorable, all while knowing that your current gray market access is basically guaranteed to be cut off the moment regulation does arrive. It's a tough pill to swallow.
Okay, let's try and summarize this deep dive then. Botswana presents this really unique, almost contradictory picture. You've got a country with truly stellar digital infrastructure, high stability, pretty good governance, third least corrupt in Africa.
That's right.
Yet its iGaming sector, the online part, is currently defined by just completely unmitigated regulatory risk and frankly crippling economics because the market's just too small for the costs involved right now.
Yeah, that sums it up well. And our final analysis on entry strategy, based on all this data, is pretty clear-cut. Who should absolutely avoid this market? Startups. Mid-sized operators with limited capital, sometimes. Let's say anything under that $3 million mark we mentioned. And anyone looking for a quick ROI, say in the next 18 to 36 months, forget it.
Okay, so conversely, who should even consider it? Is there anyone?
Well, maybe. It's a very short list. We're talking extremely well-capitalized strategic investors. Think major global players who can genuinely afford to play the long game. waiting 5, maybe 7 years or more for regulation, absorbing losses along the way. Or perhaps large regional operators who might already have a significant base nearby, say in South Africa. They might be able to serve the Botswana market incrementally with minimal new investment, leveraging their existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
But even that's a stretch.
Right. So what does this all mean for you listening? I guess the main takeaway is don't let those appealing headline stats, the great internet penetration, the stability fool you. Don't mistake that potential for immediate viability. The biggest risk here isn't really getting prosecuted today. It's pouring money into a gray market only to be locked out entirely, unable to recoup any of that substantial investment when Botswana finally decides to regulate online gambling properly.
Exactly. And maybe we can leave you with this final thought to mull over. Given Botswana's track record of stable governance and quite measured economic ambitions, when they do finally decide to regulate the online market,
Hmm.
what will that framework look like? Will it be designed purely to extract maximum tax revenue from those few giant players who could afford to wait out the storm? Or will they try to structure it in a way that actually nurtures sustainable, high-compliance local businesses, acknowledging the impossible economics of this small market for smaller players? That's the big unknown.
Definitely something to think about. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, we are the Gambling Databases research team, and we're dedicated to decoding the global iGaming landscape with clear, data-driven analysis like this. For the full text of this report on Botswana and many other country reports digging into regulations, taxation, and market trends, please do visit our website. That's gamblingdatabases.com. Thanks for listening.